or let me start with, this is, we're all real. We're not AI, okay? We're all real, okay? Just make sure we put it in perspective. So we're going to be joined in by, and I'll start from this side. So my name is Ghassan Abu Alfa, as you heard already. I'm a physician at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, heavily involved with C3 for forever, since C3 started, and great delight to be again here this year. And joined me by Dr. Gabi Hanna, great friend, a great physician who's currently serving as CEO of and co-founder of the Lamasu Pharmaceutical. And then we have Dr. Arbor Shehu. He wears two hats. He works at AstraZeneca, but he's coming also as a faculty from Johns Hopkins, and this is where we're going to be probably focusing the discussion today. And then we have the late Dr. Otto Metzger, who is our Associate Medical Director for the International Strategic Initiatives for the group at the Harvard Medical School. And great to see you again, Otto. And also we have Dr. Lauren Powell, who is our doctor and head of the health equity at Biogen. So as you see, we're quite a diverse group, but we definitely will bring very important perspective. So with this said, I'm going to just go to my chair, and so I can engage with my colleagues. And my first question is going to be for Dr. Hanna. You know, AI, I mean, let's get real. I mean, I want to act smart, I say AI, but what's AI? Just tell us, like, what's AI?
Oh, that's a big question. So I will tell you from my perspective, at least, AI, maybe it is more accelerate how to gather information and how to jump to better conclusion. So from my perspective as CEO of pharmaceutical, I try to find this information and make the right conclusion. So it looks like similar to what AI does, but I think there is many other considerations maybe AI doesn't do, and that would be my job, how to do it.
Fair. So can I, in lay terms, say AI is like a way for technology to think like us? Is that fair, or what do you think?
Maybe, but for my simple things, I take the good advantage of AI is how to gather the tons of information and to process them in faster time.
Okay.
So at least that's how I look at AI.
Fair. And I think it's a good start to kind of like our core discussion, and you kind of like will be the perfect to start this with your Lamasu. It's a new company, evolving things. And as we know, the bread and butter for a new idea is to kind of like have a certain asset, you look at it, you study it, you do probably some preclinical work, get some clinical trials, you move on through the path. And this is what probably Lamasu would or could do. But the question is, how would AI at this relatively early level in development of a certain asset will be valuable to you?
So I don't know. That's number one. And I think a lot of clinician, maybe if you try to figure it out yet. So in early stage, I think early AI would be beneficial to learn a little bit before you make the decision. But when you are in the journey, at least for where we are at Lamasu, we are in a clinical stage. So it is not theoretical anymore. It is patient data. It is real data. Every patient behaves differently. You have to make decisions based on individual patient. So for us, I would say we are a little bit past the AI phase, at least for where we are currently. It might play roles later on as we have bigger set of data to predict some combination or predict some side effect on bigger population. But at this stage, we like to see real data, real patient for where we are currently. So it is, we have this discussion almost every few weeks with my team, how to use AI to accelerate our advantage, accelerate our development. At this point, we don't use it.
Sure. Well, you bring a very important point, and I can see from my side eye, Dr. Powell is looking at you and saying, wait a minute, because to be fair, you're saying we are beyond AI. But Dr. Powell, as the head of the health equity at Biogen, they are really in the midst of the whole process. So would love to hear from you. Are we done with AI, or for Dr. Hanna, or how AI is helping you at your stage?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I think we are in the throes of AI, and I think there are certainly ways that artificial intelligence is helping to advance drug development, helping to accelerate drug development. But when I think about what is informing artificial intelligence, that is the data that's informing artificial intelligence, I think we have a very long way to go to make sure that that data is truly inclusive. One thing I've been thinking about recently is that, just like we talk about healthcare deserts or infusion deserts, there are data deserts. Right? I think we assume that everyone is constantly generating this data that is going in to inform the models that we are largely very dependent on sometimes in our use of AI. But the reality is, just as we talked about in the last panel, and people kind of chuckled, that there are hospitals, public health systems that are still using fax. There are several doctors' offices that are still using paper records. So that I would consider patients who are part of those communities to be in a data desert because their data is not being imported as a part of many of these data sets that we rely on so heavily. Juxtaposed by people, many of us in this room who have wearables, we have Fitbits and Oura Rings and Apple Watches and lots of data that's constantly feeding into a system, and we are highly visible in the system. But the people who are not visible are still invisible, and the systems we're creating are going to compound that invisibility.
I like what you're saying. Actually, from this morning, if you recall, our colleague in regard to Alzheimer's said pretty much like, the gathering of prevention early in the game and presumably like information knowledge will drop actually the cost by a massive amount, close about 30+%. And do you think, in other words, AI is helping you in your setup at this point in time to really reduce cost and same time enhance accessibility to care?
I mean, I definitely do. I think, artificial intelligence, use of digital twins, the ability to potentially accelerate drug development, especially in the area of like rare diseases, for example, where it's very hard to recruit patients for trials. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and drug development itself is a very expensive business. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but I still think in order for us to see maximum benefit beyond just financial benefit and sort of acceleration benefit, there are lots of other factors we have to consider.
I hear you. Let's carry on to while we're talking about data, and let's kind of carry on to Dr. Metzger. So you kind of you wear a very important hat at the Harvard system in regard to the international assets, and we're talking about data here. Is like data in our mindset is like Harvard data, Boston data, Massachusetts data, the US, or the whole world? Tell us about how broad should we go?
Thank you. I think that we're going to see a big transformation in my part of like medicine, which is oncology, because I don't think we should see data as just isolated from a given institution or a given subset of patients. The power of artificial intelligence that we're seeing just at the beginning, it's going to be mind-blowing. And one area where I think that we're going to see most of the transformation is going to be in the prevention of cancer. So at Dana-Farber, we have a clinic now for cancer interception and prevention because we're acknowledging the importance of looking at cancer before it arises, before the diagnosis of cancer. And when we think about cancer prevention and the data that's going to be needed for us to understand what are the causes, what are the associations related to cancer, we've mastered genomics. So at Dana-Farber, for all patients with metastatic disease, we do a whole genome profiling of cancer. It's very sophisticated. It's becoming widely available across institutions, so the genomic information is available. We have the EMR data. We're starting to get data from patients, directly from patients, in terms of the side effects that they have with treatments, the other diseases that they have. We're using wearables. So the idea is to have a system where you can gather all this data and with large volume of patients across populations, start to have real insights into what's causing cancer and really deploy strategies to prevent. And when we think about this and we talk like in a panel like that, we can be very optimistic, but one can say, but what is the reality? What can be done tomorrow? And as an example, we're discussing, we're probably starting a project as soon as next year, where we will have a massive effort tailored towards diet, exercise, linked to whole genome of a very large population, and see how these interventions can play out in terms of the prevention of cancers, such as breast cancer, prostate cancer, and so on. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, because once you start to follow a large population and you're gathering more information, you start to develop insights into additional causes and additional things that we have no clue about because the data was never collected. And again, with computer science, the capability of us of linking things, it goes beyond what we could do 5 years ago. So I'm really expecting big changes in medicine with data acquisition and computer modeling.
Well, I love very much what you said, but I have to admit that I'm still, and I'm talking on behalf of the audience as well, none of us are still yet satisfied in that perfect answer that either came from any of you yet. So let me try one more time with my friend, Dr. Shebu. So, Dr. Shebu, you wear two hats, but I would like to see if we can, maybe we'll know better, translate all of this into the real world. Like, how do therapies now evolve based on AI? Are we still like, just cookie cutter? How we translate the data and like, this is the therapy you need because of X, Y, and Z. Tell us more from practicality. Are we there yet?
Yeah, so great point. First of all, every morning when I wake up, I just get my cup of coffee and I turn on the TV and you see Good Morning America, right? And you can see the weather, right? They say like if it's raining or it's snowing and so on, or sometimes they tell like where the hurricane is going, how long it's gonna be. So meteorologists are using this platform by using data from satellites, by using data from the ground, by using historical data and so on. So my question always was like, why we are not using this kind of platforms from the healthcare system in order to predict more than just to prevent? So why we are being reactive instead of being proactive? When I go back, when I was working at Hopkins, running a real-world evidence study on COVID vaccine effectiveness, so we assembled a group of institutions, around 21 across the US, and then we were trying to collect as much as we can data. That time, AI was just like maybe a buzzword in some institutions, but wasn't very effective. So the challenge that we had is we have to enter all the data manually from the EPIC system through the RedCap and so on. This took a lot of time. This made my work hard and all of the coordinators. And then another thing is vaccine registry. It's very complicated. At that time, was very complicated in order to recruit the patients. So after the vaccines were approved, the question was, are these effective in the real world? No one knew that. So the group called IV Network, led by CDC and University of Vanderbilt, which we were part of that as well from Hopkins, we came with a study, and after that, a couple of other studies, that vaccines are effective in preventing the hospitalization for X, Y, and Z based on the data. So the real-world data helped to understand better how these vaccines are effective, which category of individuals, and so on. That time, AI didn't exist. But now, from like industry perspective, if you have a new clinical trials, a new data, the most important thing is you know how the trial works in the different category of individuals, but how in the real world this trial will work. So if we have the implementation, the integration of this fragmented system into the different kind of a workflow of different kind of health systems, we can make it easier to predict which patients are more beneficial, where we can have our mechanism of resistance, patient's adherence, economical cost, and so on and so on. So if we want to understand that, we definitely need to have a data, but not only to have this data. Because sometimes you don't need a watch that doesn't work, even if it's a good watch. So you have a lot of data, but you need to integrate. In order to integrate that, you cannot do by yourself. You need a system.
I love what you're saying. It actually is a great kind of segue to a very important question. Back to Dr. Hanna. So when you do a clinical trial, what you and I and many of us have done is, you put certain number of registrants on one side of the trial, another side of the trial, like, X versus Y, placebo versus drug versus drug, and then you see what kind of number you come up with, and that's it, either as positive or negative. But to be fair, we're dependent on that, on a system inside a clinic, patients who come to you with the problem, and you work accordingly. But now Dr. Shehu is actually inviting us, and already many of us are involved in regard to the real data. Shall I really look at this kind of like cohort of patients in a specific clinical trial to really tell the world how to treat this specific disease? Or should I really look at the real world evidence data to begin with? Have you thought in your company to really bring in real world evidence data as being the base for trial, or where does this stand altogether?
So, one thing actually, General Petraeus stopped me when he was talking this morning. He was talking about when he listened to his officer, he looking for judgment.
Yep.
So sometimes the data is there, but when you treat patient, it comes to individual patient, you have to do the best. You use the real world data, I think, more as cautionary, because as we know as physician, every patient might behave differently. And many times it's not like everything's going to be repeated. Maybe it's more cautionary, and you make your best judgment and best to the patient, how to serve that patient.
No, I hear your thoughts, and this caution can be, definitely appreciated. But at the same time, however, action can come from this. And to that matter, Dr. Powell, like real-world data in your field, and remember, you have great experience, and we spoke about that in regard to biosimilars, where really it's almost like the real world. Tell us, like, how can you drive a certain asset in your company to move based on real-world data?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we rely on real-world data quite a bit in drug development. And what I'm just sort of continuing to grapple with is, like, what do we actually mean by real-world data? I think we have a definition that exists, but I don't know that it's expansive enough, right? If we're only looking at clinical factors to help us determine whether a patient will be adherent to a medication, whether a healthcare provider will actually prescribe a medication, how successful something will do in the market, then we're missing a whole lot of information. We know that, for example, the social determinants of health, that is everything outside of the time you may spend with a healthcare provider or within a healthcare setting, matters much more to a patient's health outcomes, and even to their adherence to medication than just the time they spend, with a doctor. And if we don't have a clear line of sight into that, and what I mean by the social determinants of health are things like transportation, education, food security, whether you live in a food swamp or a food desert, how long it takes you to actually get to the doctor. It's not whether there is a doctor's office present. It's, does it take you 2 hours? Does it take you 2 hours to walk? Does it take you 2 hours on a train? Does it take you 2 days? There are parts of this country in the United States, there are parts around the world where it takes people days to get to healthcare facilities. So if we're not taking that into consideration, we're missing a lot of very vital information. The last thing I'll say is that I don't think we can have a discussion about technology without discussing social media and the amount of data that is in social media. For better or for worse, there are millions of people who get their healthcare advice from TikTok. For better or for worse. And so if we don't have a line of sight into that, if we are not actually looking into who are the influencers there that people are getting their information from, if we're not willing to partner with them and understand what is the information they're sharing, then we're missing major opportunities to actually gather real-world data and to truly understand what's happening in the real world.
No, I love very much what you said. Actually, to that matter, actually, yes, some of us are probably blinded or blinding themselves or ourselves from how things are running in the world. And you're absolutely right. Patients come to clinic nowadays, they already are holding in their, in their hand which trial, which study, but more importantly, the source of it is not necessarily from the medical field, but literally from the social media. Actually, a little bit of a secret, that's not a secret, but this is really what we all do. In the old days, we used to look into PubMed to search. Guess what we're doing now? We're looking at search engines.
Right.
Because there's just the perspective is much broader to that matter. And I do stand on, and I'm glad at least we come with, let's put it as like one take, one item today so far. That Bhaskar, along that line, and we kind of spent the whole morning and still is really celebrating the great effort that King Faisal is doing in Saudi Arabia. And this is a great institution. But interestingly, to be fair, this is the reality. At the end of the day, a patient in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else in the world, if we want to treat them, we're going to treat them based on what Dana-Farber has done, what Memorial Sloan Kettering has done, not necessarily what has been done there. So how would you think about that from the international perspective?
Are you asking me?
I'll ask Dr. Metzger here, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I think that's...
I hope both of you listen to the question. So.
That's it's a very important question, and as a clinician and trialist, I pay a lot of attention to that, because when we do clinical trials, a lot of these studies are conducted mostly in Europe and in the US, and we don't have a broad representation from different countries, and we know that patients come with different genetic landscapes. What we learn from the clinical trials here may not be applicable elsewhere. So there are huge opportunities for us to rethink about how we do clinical trials, what are the regulations that are involved in clinical trials, what are the barriers to taking these studies to a broader scale. And I think all those things are likely to get better as we improve on our ability to gather data and run away from classic systems that we require, those old systems like with the classic ECRFs that are very methodic and complex. And we start to gather data from the clinical setting. We start to gather data directly from patients. And imagine that everyone carries a cell phone. Every individual in the planet has a cell phone nowadays. It's really, everyone is connected. So there are efforts now where you can run clinical trials directly with patients. At Dana-Farber, many years ago, we had an initiative where we're contacting patients who had metastatic breast cancer, and they were sending samples from their biopsies to be profiled through a genomic program. And this was through a clinical trial where we sequenced thousands of patients from all over the country, and the contact was between the investigator at Dana-Farber and patients directly. So we are at the moment with technology and innovation where we're going to be able to run clinical trials and gather data in very innovative ways. So we're not going to be just relying on the old system for drug development, and hopefully with that it's going to be much more inclusive and we're going to be able to learn much more.
I hear you, but however, let's see if this can be challenging for institutions or for companies as well. So, Dr. Shehu, in other words, to translate that into real-world language, it means that we're gonna do a custom-made therapy for every patient based on their fit and design, which, interestingly, this is financially is like next to impossible, because each patient is gonna have their own specific therapy. And my question is, are we going to try to at least kind of like, collect patients in smaller cohorts of really that have applicability? Have you seen anything yet happening in that regard, or we're still into the one-size-fits-all approach?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are a lot of points here. First of all, about the education first, the adaptation of that trial to the community. This is one of the challenges that we see from the industry perspective, right? And then when it comes to have a customized treatment, you can imagine like Netflix, right, or Uber, like it comes wherever you are and pick you up. The similar strategy, it's on the way. It's not there yet. The biggest challenge and question that we received from key opinion leaders or expert is, okay, this data are very effective, but what about patient selections? Is there anything that we can do in order to understand which patient exactly need this one, and after how many months or like maybe a year can progress to this disease may progress? So The good thing is we are seeing from the industry perspective that we cannot do things alone. So when you see what startups are doing, what kind of innovative ideas and platforms they are building to incorporate and to collaborate with industries, gives me a lot of hope that these are coming. It's on the way. However, we still need this fragmented data to incorporate one and to make a predictive analysis which patients needs for which therapy. It's similar, as I mentioned, for Netflix or for DoorDash or for other industries that are working. However, we are not still there yet. There's a lot of work to do. However, I believe that if the government will build that infrastructure, especially, as you know, in around 70 to 80% of patients with cancers are being treated in community settings, we need to empower community physicians. We need to educate patients as well. For example, you mentioned very well that patients cannot go to the PubMed to read those papers, but they're not expert. But from the industry perspective, what we are doing is we are trying to use the AI in a digital platform through different kind of vendors, different kind of platforms that collaborate with an industry, how we can provide the best way in the plain language information that patients can understand about their biomarkers, about the way of treatment, and then how we can give patients a better treatment experience. It's not about just treating them, giving them a better experience while they're going through their disease journey, not only cancer.
I like what you're saying, and actually we'll touch on those two components. And I'll carry on first before the experience of the patient. Let's talk about the data generation per se. And in other words, to translate it one more time, in a potential trial, as you're well aware, I kind of like helped quite a bit in regard to and helped to bringing in forward the use of the immunotherapy checkpoint inhibitors into the field of liver cancer. And yes, in a way, you can read it as one size fits all. So one of the exercises that we're doing, and we're still doing, we're collecting cohorts of patients from literally all over the world, not necessarily patients who receive therapy, but simply we're looking into signatures that can tell us exactly which therapy they should get. In the old days, for example, we thought maybe if they have a certain etiology for the cancer, being hepatitis B, hepatitis C, alcohol, fatty liver, but now we're looking into, and we found already so far 16 signatures that you can really probably dissect or direct the therapy accordingly. Now, one of the challenges, and that's where I want to come into now the practicality part, we do this, and now, of course, we have great relationship in regard to the colleagues that we're working with, wherever they are in the world. But I go back to Dr. Hanna, I got those samples, we do the analysis on them, and let's say, and this, by the way, some happened in certain caveats. Who owns that data? The patient can say, well, wait a minute, this is mine. Why are you working on it? Your thoughts on that?
You are the GD here.
I'll come to that. Actually, to that matter, let me help you out. To be fair, he got me. But interesting, this is kind of like quite fascinating is that, and I think, by the way, it applies to all of us. Most of the world, each one of us own our own data. In other words, if we go now to a hospital and they draw blood from us, who owns that blood? Ourselves. Any of you, you own that blood. You simply gave a certain courtesy and certain entrust to that institution, that hospital, that, you know what, you know better how to preserve blood. Let's just, let you take care of it, but ultimately it's my data. Interestingly, this came actually all the way to the court one time. You might recall, and this probably you are the expert as well on that, a certain type of leukemia would require actually removal of the spleen in the old days. Now we don't do it anymore, but in those days. So that spleen was taken out, and this, by the way, is public. It's not like we're diverging anything. This is all public. As you know, in the law, everything is public. So that patient had the surgery at UCLA. And if anything, they took spleen out, and they preserved it, and they kind of like kept drawing blood from the patient with the idea that, we'll learn more and more. Interestingly, one day they said, oops, we probably need to consent the patient to that. So they went ahead and called the patient. By interesting luck, that day at home, he was sitting with his friend who's a lawyer. And he said, oh, by the way, you need to probably consent to that. This went all the way to the Supreme Court of California. And my question to you is the following, because the patient came and said, this is my spleen, this is my blood, you guys have no right to it. And while UCLA is saying, oh, but we're working on it, et cetera, et cetera. And the fascinating part is that who really did the Supreme Court stand on which side? Fascinating, I'm not going to probe you on that, but interestingly, it stood on the UCLA side. And why is that? And this is really what can be a nice probe into the answer to this, because they said, this is information, maybe yes, they were wrong, they should have, and they gave him a tap on the finger, it's like, maybe we should have consented the patient, but more importantly, because this serves humanity. And this is exactly the point. So now, to go back to you, to put in the question perspective, how do you merge between humanity and individuality?
So I think the ethical part of how we practice, it should be always in mind. Kind of preserve the community and also how to preserve also the interest of that patient. We face a lot of patients sometimes for whatever reason, sometimes religious and other things, they don't want to be even treated. So sometimes you respect, sometimes you push back, but the ethical part always, it should be in mind for every physician and also comes to the data. But this piece, you cannot live also without the people around you. So you have obligation to the society, and at the same time, the society have obligation to the one. So it is very big, difficult balancing point, but also to treat one cancer patient for our clinical trial, to enroll them, as you know, it is very costly, it is very intense work. So it is not just that patient. You help by treating that patient with any new drug. Really, you're treating that patient, but at the same time, you try to see whatever you learn from it and apply it for thousands and millions of people. So every one person in clinical trial, maybe if the drug is successful, is equal to 1,000 or 1 million people going to be treated based on that one single data. So it is not easy philosophical point, but I think the intent, always it should be having ethical ground why you do what you do.
Fair. No, I agree. And Dr. Powell, did you face that challenge in regard to some analyses that came out with and data acquisition and who owns what?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what you're asking, the undercurrent of this question to me is also about trust. Yep. And I think that we highly undervalue and underestimate the power of mistrust and distrust that exist in a lot of corners of this country as well as the world. And ultimately, we work to try to create real community conversations. We try to create real community bonds and relationships and ongoing community engagement, which I think should actually be a part of drug development throughout the entire life cycle. Because what good does it do for us to put millions of dollars into creating therapeutics that then patients don't even trust to use? Because they maybe don't know the organization. Healthcare providers maybe don't know us, so why would they prescribe a medication? So I think the question about data ownership to me is one about trust and people questioning, well, what are you doing with my data? And so we're also thinking through that in a sense of clinical trial transparency. Are there ways that we can share the outcomes of a clinical trial with patients who participated? Even if they screen out, can we share pre-screen with them so that they at least know this is what we did and this is how this information will be leveraged? That does a lot to take away what feels like a shroud of black, like a black box that we're in sometimes in this industry. And I would venture to say, even when it comes to artificial intelligence, everyone is not excited about AI because everyone doesn't understand it. So people don't understand how their data is going to be leveraged, how it's going to be used. And I think the more we can provide some transparency around that, the more we can build trust to ensure that the solutions we're creating will actually have uptake in communities.
No, I totally agree on that. And that along that line, to go back to Dr. Metzger, so did you face in your international activity at the Harvard system that challenge of acquisition data from other parts of the world? And especially, would love to, what we didn't touch on yet, but in regard to can it serve in predictive analyses for prevention as well? Your thoughts?
Thank you. I think that those are very important. They're very important aspects. One that should not be minimized is the importance of appropriate consent. Because when we interact with patients or population and we're gathering data, patients need to be informed about what type of data is going to be collected and how this is going to be used. Because we do get a lot of additional knowledge and the research questions that are being asked. And there's a lot of research. We have a team that dedicates a lot of effort in terms of how to make this communication between us and the population real, so they understand what they are consenting for. In terms of gathering data from different populations and in terms of the international setting, I think that we're going through a moment of change. There is more acceptance to research in different parts, in different countries outside the US and Europe. There is more interest from our colleagues overseas in being part of research efforts. And I think that we're going to start to do research not just with novel drugs coming from AstraZeneca or Biogen. We're going to start to do research with data that exists while treating large number of patients, because we're going to get a new level of data that didn't exist before or were not able to digest before. That's the beauty of the computer science now, that with vast amount of data, we're going to be able to digest and make sense of data in a way that we're not able to do before. So in oncology, when we develop new medications, immunotherapies, toxicity is very important. We pay a lot of attention into toxicities because they can be life-threatening. And the way the toxicity is collected through our classic clinical trial system, it's very good for high-grade toxicity. Things that are very serious, they don't get missed on clinical trials. But there's a huge need for us to do clinical trials with a focus on low-grade toxicity. So if someone had a high-grade toxicity with a novel immunotherapy that could be life-threatening, it didn't start as high-grade from day 0 to high-grade. There is a history that comes before, and that gets missed. Gets missed because we're not seeing the patients every day. We're not talking to the patients on a frequency that we should. And now, with this new system and these new technologies, these novel clinical trials that we're starting to do now, we're going to start to gather what's called patient-reported outcomes, where patients are able to interact with the system and provide us with information on a daily basis about how they're feeling, what is happening in terms of nausea, what is the fatigue, what is really happening in terms of low-grade toxicities. And this could be transformative because it allows us really to act on low-grade toxicity before we have adverse events. We've done clinical trials in pilots where small interventions can lead to better adherence. Patients stay on medications for longer if we're acting on side effects. So, and this was basically not feasible years ago before having artificial intelligence, before having systems able to gather this vast amount of data and make interventions that could be really transformative. And this goes back to the international community. This will eventually will allow us to do clinical trials in a global scale, because we're going to be able to gather data from patients directly through going through all sorts of imaginable treatments. We're going to be able to look into how different comorbidities may play out in terms of how patients behave to certain therapies. So it's really, we're going through a real transformation. And when we see artificial intelligence, which I can barely understand how the systems actually work, but I know what is the product. I know that we have systems that are able to digest data into a way that was not feasible last year. Yeah. So it's really, I think research is going to be really very different.
No, totally agreed on that. So let's try to wrap it up. And maybe Dr. Shehu, you can give us really like the lay of the ground, the lay of the field today. I mean, as you notice, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of kind of, concepts per se, But to be fair, especially in the healthcare, we are not there yet where other technology is helping out. We're just kind of like in the gathering phase, if you want to think it that way. But where do you think we're going? Is it going to be custom made one day, or is it going to be like the industry is going to change altogether? What do you think?
So if we are going to answer from the developed country perspective, I'm going to give you a different answer. If we're going to talk about developing countries, it's going to be totally different because they lack tons of infrastructure. However, I believe that we are going to, in that moment, that we need to definitely include external and internal stakeholders, multidisciplinary team in order to process this data. We need to include different experts, not only health. We have to include engineers and AIs. We have to include individuals who works in the healthcare policy, also in government, in order to protect the data first, to build the infrastructure, to provide resources from the industry, to provide research from academia, at the same time to provide great innovative ideas from the startups. If we don't do these collaborations, we cannot go nowhere.
Well, as you can see, all of us, this is not an easy task. And to be fair, we have a lot of pieces that we're trying to put together, but we're not there yet. But at least we can all reassure ourselves that the healthcare industry is definitely paying attention, is definitely acting on, and clearly, as you can see here from the whole broad spectrum of the panel, collaboratively working on really what will be best ultimately for the patients. We're not sure where it's going to fall ultimately, but definitely there will be a lot of clues that are coming up as we go that definitely is going to impact how we even discover drugs, how we study drugs, how we analyze drugs, and of course how we ultimately deliver drugs. But with this said, I'd like to thank all my dear colleagues here, which we really prepared quite a bit for. I think